that really is the amazing thing about this product, that you can do stuff very quickly with it. And what's changed in the last few years is, in the last 10 years, is that first off, Tableau's development cycle is way faster than most software companies I've seen in my life. Quarterly releases are not something you see generally consistently followed for years. And they went through some learning curve problems and some adjustments when you're doubling your revenue every year for 5 or 6 straight years, and you go from a $5 million business to a almost $2 billion company. There's some, digestion problems you go through from time to time. But what's been amazing about Tableau's consistency is that the product itself looks more or less like it did 12 years ago. The visual way it acts, all they've done is add more ways to do it easier, but they haven't generally deprecated any feature. So if you learned something 8 years ago a certain way, probably it still works that way. And how many of you use software products where the next release came out and the most basic, simple thing that you could do with your eyes shut, half asleep, it doesn't do it that way anymore because somebody redesigned the whole thing needlessly. And so that's really what's brilliant about the product. Now, I have to say something that if I can learn Tableau Prep, because I just hit 60, if a 60-year-old guy can learn to use Tableau Prep, you can. And I'm kind of interested. How many of you have tried to do anything with Tableau Prep? How many of you use Tableau Prep every day as a critical part of your workflow? Okay, 2, half. You're not convinced. How many of you consider yourselves experts with it and really know your way around it? Or you use something like Alteryx or other ETL tools? Right, so it's like a halfway group here. So I would put myself in the case of I know a lot of data architects that are working on my team, and when I have a really complicated problem, I go, Brian, would you just fix this and make an ETL flow? And I don't have to worry about building it anymore. But what was fun about this is that on my vacation a couple weeks ago, I forced myself to go and do the deep dive, all right, in Tableau Prep. I've been fiddling with it on and off, but I haven't really tried to build something with every single kind of transformation tool in it. And this example that I'm going to walk through pretty quickly uses every type of transformation, corrects a lot of things. And the interesting observation I made about it is that it's very much like the data interpreter in Tableau, which I think I gave a talk here 6 years ago, and I said, how many of you have used the data interpreter? And like one person raised their hand and the other one halfway raised their hand. And then I called a lot of Zen masters and said, are you using the data interpreter? And they go, no. I'm like, well, why? Well, it's not cool. It doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't do that. And that's a mistake, because when Tableau comes out with a feature, it's usually coming out with the bare minimum that needs to just be useful to some people. And if you learn it then, when they keep releasing the dots, you then have a much easier time learning it than if you wait till it's fully mature and try to catch up. And I think this product is sort of in phase of 1 to 10, it's like phase 4.5 right now. It's like good for an analyst that's pretty sharp and wants to build things that are fairly complicated from multiple data sources. But frankly, the transformation I'm going to build here, I could have built a data interpreter with far less effort. The difference is it's not a repeatable workflow that's documented that other people could clearly understand. So where does this product fit is the question number one, and the one I get from a lot of people, why do I need it? I have ETL tools. We bought, lots of Alteryx licenses. Why do I need Tableau Prep? Well, you don't need it. On the other hand, it comes with the creator license, and it's there for you to use, so the cost is pretty low. I'm going to also just walk through the environment in a bunch of screenshots quickly first, so you kind of get the flyover from the 50,000 foot level, and then I'm going to step through using all those things while I build something out. And so we'll build a flow, the last half of this talk, and we'll publish the flow to Tableau server, and they're calling the Tableau server for flows Conductor, which allows you to schedule refreshing of flows, so it's very much like an ETL tool for the Tableau environment. So this is the other way to think of it. You can spend bunches of money on very good ETL tools. All the stack providers, have them. They work very well, but they're technical tools for technical people, and they usually cost a fair amount of money. Alteryx has had a very great run, still improving their product every year. It's more geared towards the Tableau crowd, and it's more mature than Tableau Prep, but it's not super inexpensive. It does cost some money, but it's a very good tool for a lot of people. Tableau Prep to me is a really simple sale. It's free if you have the creator license. And how many of you work in companies that say have less than a couple hundred employees? And how many of you have actual BI teams that build things for you and do it all? Well, that's data companies. Because I run into a few 100,000 companies on my list of potentials that don't have any BI team, don't have any database, they have spreadsheets, and lots of them. And so this is an entree for those kind of people to get into the world of BI at one level. If you're working for a big company, you're doing consulting work, you're a really good analyst, and you have to bring together data from a lot of different data sources, this probably will help you do that. Now, there's some similarities between how the desktop starter page looks. This is just Tableau Desktop. You see the left side, you got all the connection types, the center is sort of all the things you've worked on, the bottom of the center are examples, the right side is Tableau's sort of training materials and advertisements in the lower right. There's Tableau Prep. I didn't expose all the connections, but it's a very similar look and feel to the desktop tool. The center are your flows that are built on the top, the bottom are example flows, the right side are training materials. So it's very consistent with how the desktop tool looks. The other thing I'd point out is there's, if you're really new to it, you don't know the vocabulary, right there on that screen, if you look, there's a little online help tool that has the visual vocabulary that gives you what the words are they use to describe the different parts of the screen. It's really easy to access and useful. They also have a PDF version of it, so you can print it out if you forget the words. And then this is sort of the basic way Tableau describes the different parts of the screen. You've got the connection panes just like in desktop. The upper area where you normally have your worksheet view or you're building things, that's the flow view. That's where you're dropping your different tools to do different kinds of transformations. The area down there in the middle bottom, that's the profile pane, is each card is a field. And you can do lots of things just like you would do the fields in the data interpreter. You can reinterpret what the field is, rename it, you can do calculations. A lot of consistency between that and how Tableau Desktop are organized. And then the data grid, which I've more or less hidden on the bottom, is just like the data grid in desktop. You're exposing a sampling of the rows and all the columns. So these are the different tools that are currently available. It's maybe not every nuanced version of the tool, but it's the big ones. You need to input data, that's an input step. You want to add a step, that's the same as saying I want to do cleaning on something. They call it add step, but it's really the cleaning tool. Unions and joins are possible. Output makes sense. When you build a flow, you want to output it somewhere. Pivots, if you want to pivot data that's sort of, too many columns, you want to make it more row-oriented, you can do that. And then the aggregate step is, I have two very dissimilar levels of detail in my data that I want to bring together. You can re-aggregate them so they're on the same level of detail. So what's interesting about this is that in some ways it's more difficult than the data interpreter. Because you're building a permanent flow, you have to define these things a little more granularly than you would if you're building some ad hoc thing with data blending. But what's cool about it is that if you're an accountant, for example, and you have the same set of reports every month, and you're running a lot of spreadsheets, and and you have to update all those spreadsheets. And it's really the same thing over and over again. This is probably going to save you a lot of time. I think I have at least a dozen clients that are accountants that are just starting to realize what this is going to do for them. And that's what I expect will happen. The most expert people are going to be people that aren't database experts, that really need these tools, that are doing a lot of manual updating every month. They're going to learn this tool better than the database experts, because it's going to help them a lot. So these are what some of these steps look like. Again, Tableau's metaphor for everything is that it's an icon, it has a specific meaning. So all these different transformation types have specific, appearance. The input step looks like the little circle. It can have different colors. The cleaning step has this thing that looks like a bar. The little icons above the cleaning step are different types of data adjustments you're making, hiding fields, transforming the data type, doing calculations. Everything means something, just like in Tableau. If it's got a symbol or a color or a shape, it's got some specific underlying meaning. Then this is a union. You can see the union can be achieved by just dragging something on top of another something, and then defining what kind of join it is. Union, left, inner, right. It's really simple drop and drag kind of things. And then what you're seeing on the bottom of the screen are a couple of little pointers. If you're bringing something together for the first time and you're not really that familiar with the data, you might be bringing in 10 data sets that presumably have identical column structures. In this particular example, it's highlighting something that doesn't fit a pattern. Maybe there's a field that isn't named consistently. So it's just giving you visual cues to help you see that there's an inconsistency in the data, which is really slick and very intuitive once you understand how it works. Here's a join. The join is got a lot of different things you can expose on the bottom. What fields are you doing the join on, what type of join it is, any outlier conditions that are not being picked up in the join is highlighting in red. Those are mismatched fields. And then over on the right, you see the data cards, and then the data is also displayed in the lower right, the actual rows. Now the pivot step is just like it sounds. You have a big set of data. You have lots of columns that really shouldn't be columns. You can define pivots in here one time. You're done. After that, it's pretty amazing. And then finally, you're going to output data in some way. You can have as many outputs in your flow as you want, just to check stuff. Frequently when I'm doing things, I'll be working with a cleaning object, and it's got a certain set of tools and views, but sometimes I just want to output it to see what it looks like. And so you can run an output step anywhere in the flow you want. You can have as many outputs as you want. You can run them on demand, and if you want to just send it out to a file and see what it looks like, you can do that very easily. And then here's an aggregation step. So this is a case where you might have a very detailed set of data that you're going to join to a much less detailed set of data. The classic would be you have sales data coming from a transaction system that might have hundreds of millions of records, but the budget file for that has 100 records for 12 months. And you have to somehow join those two together and make it work. That's what this is for. Taking dissimilarly aggregated data and putting it on the same level so you can make the join work. Then here's a cleaning step. You see the bar up there that I've circled. Again, all those little symbols are different sorts of inside that data itself that you might be transforming a data type, you might be doing a calculation. And you can click on those symbols and it will expose the variables that are contained within that particular symbol. I will show you this when we start building. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that buried deep in the manual, I always want to know, what do all the little symbols mean? Because once you work with it for a while, you get familiar with them, but there's always the odd symbol that only shows up occasionally. And if you're not aware of what you're trying to do and what type of data it is, you may have never seen that particular symbol before. So in the manual, you can go and search these. They're probably not the complete list. I've noticed that about Tableau. The manual sometimes doesn't keep up with the software releases. But it does give you some sense of the variety of things you might see, both in the cleaning steps and the profile cards. All right, so that's the intro. And now what I'm going to try to do is build a flow that's going to blend 6 different data sources. Let's see, what else is it going to do? Sorry, I just built this thing last week and I didn't look at it until this morning. I have a cheat sheet. Let's see, we've got 6 data sources. We have 1 union, 1 aggregate step, 1 pivot, 2 different joins. One's an inner, one's a left. 4 cleaning steps, about 10 or 12 data transformations, and we're taking 2 very dissimilar data sources. One of my favorite public data sources is the Census Bureau because it's always got problems. Data's great, but it's formatted just way, so I'm using Census Data because it's got a lot of problems and it's useful. So that's what we're going to do, hopefully, in the next 30 minutes or so. Did somebody raise their hand? Okay. My vision only goes about 4 feet from my face right now. Everybody's a fuzz up. All right, so let me start the flow, and let me show you the end result of what we're going to build. So it doesn't quite fit on this screen, so I'm going to show you. Well, I took Superstore and I broke it in a variety of ways. Oops, what's going on here? Anybody got a clue, Paul? Because my screen is not looking like that. Let me close out. Yes. And then, well, one more thing I need to close. I'm just going to narrow the options. There. All right. So I'm using a form of Superstore, but what I've done is broken it into pieces. So it's 4 years of sales data, right? I just broke each year into its own individual year. So that'll give me a reason to do a union, all right? So I'm going to first union some Superstore data, and then I'm going to bring in the regional manager data also from the Superstore data set, but it's also in a separate file. That will require a join. Then I'm going to do some cleaning and transformation of that, and that top line there is just that flow going through to its logical conclusion of being at the right level of detail. The flow down below here is the census data that I have to do a lot of cleaning to because it's just formatted in a bad way and has a lot of little problems. I have to pivot that data, then clean it again, then I'm going to do a join here and then exit it. So there's every kind of step you can currently do in Tableau, I think, in this example. And then there's at least 20 corrections going on within each individual case. So hopefully it'll give you a good fly through that feature set. And again, when do I have to finish, Paul?
I'm sorry, what?
Do I need to finish at 3?
Oh, you can go for a half hour. You got plenty of time.
Okay, good. So let's get started. This is something I've noticed. If you don't have a lot of internal memory, and I don't, loading prep takes a few seconds. I have a nice big Apple iMac at home with massive amounts of memory and it loads. This is a 2.5-year-old Dell with not a lot of memory. In other words, this is the worst case, right? If it works here, it's going to work probably on your computer. Now, I'm going to connect to an Excel spreadsheet, if I can remember where I put it. Let's see. Yes, you're gonna have to go through all of this. There it is. Okay. So, step one. Here are these different tables, all right? Each one represents a year of sales. I'm just gonna pull out one of the years. And that creates an input step. So, when you click on this, it exposes just what's going on there, and it's asking you a question. Do you want to just do this one, or do you want to do a wild card where you bring in multiple different tables in one step? Now, I could do that here, but I'm not. I'm going to do it the hard way because it's more fun. And it's also interesting to see how it behaves when you start dragging individual things into the view. So, for example, I could bring the next year into here. And you notice it gives it its own little color, and then I can drag another year in and another year, and all of a sudden I've got 4 input steps that all really do need to be unioned, but I haven't unioned any of them, all right? You could use wildcard union to do that, just give it a string and it will do it, but it's more fun to do it this way. Just pick up one, and you see this? Notice how you can drop it on the join, it's going to try to do that. If you say you want to do a union, just let go, and there's a union, right? You can add another one. Just go up here. Notice how you get more options. Union, add. I want to add that to that union. And then the 4th one. I'll just pick that up and add that. Now I've done a union of those 4 tables the hard way, but it's not very hard. And you could imagine in the future if you had weekly versions of this going on and you just had to bring in a latest week file and you didn't want to script it, you wanted to be able to look at it, you just easily pick it up and add it to your union in about a second and then get to work. Right now, in this particular union, there's some things that we need to fix. Right? Now, notice this little color bar down by itself. We've got 3 different colors that denote those different years, and I'm sorry my screen isn't fitting. Let me see if I can make it all come in view. You notice how these colors correspond with these different input steps? There's this one, for some reason, it looks like it's found that there's a mismatched field, and if you click on Show Only Mismatched Fields, it's showing you this one probably is the same as this other one, and you can fix that by just picking it up and dropping it on top of the other one. And now there are no more mismatched fields. It's basically pushed those 2 together. Yeah.
When you bring one field put on top of the other, does it rename one of those fields, or can you have the choice to rename one?
I don't know. We'll see what it says. It'll tell you. Honestly, I didn't even notice because I probably renamed it anyway. But I think in this case, it's probably calling it Sales 1. Something like that. Let's just see. Somewhere over here there will be a sales one. Oh, it's in there somewhere. We'll see it in a cleaning step later. It may just call it sales. I don't know. Anybody know a shortcut? When you have a tiny screen? Ah, good point. Sales. Yeah, it looks like sales. Thank you. All right, now, there's a few things that need to be fixed here. For example, row ID, the habit of the tool is when it's a number, it wants to use a histogram to represent, a count of the bucketing of that number, but is a row ID a number you want to do that to? No. So just for my own purpose, I want to change it to a string, just so I see each of the individual row IDs, and I'm really looking for a row ID that might have more than 1 in it, and it doesn't look like that's the case here. You see these little bars? It's showing you the relative number of records, and there's one of everything, so that's good. And that's the first thing I'm going to do here, just change a data type. And you notice how the little symbol appeared up here? It's showing you a visual record of the changes you're doing, which is really useful 6 months from now when you forget what you did. You need to you need to change something. The next one I'm going to just arbitrarily fix is this little problem. I made this problem because when I started using Tableau, I had a shipping group on Fridays that would forget to put the type of urgency of order priority on orders. Literally every Friday about Miller time, they just stopped filling it out at about 4:30, and on Monday, my first job every week was to fix all the non-priority and put low priority on most of it. And so that's what I'm going to fix here, because I used to have to fix that, and it works just like grouping in Tableau. And now you see another little symbol appear that's a data transformation for that. Group and replace. Pretty slick. The other thing, let's see, customer ID is in here, and I might be, scrolling through this, or just search for customer ID. And again, I don't really want it giving me a histogram there. I'd rather just have a string for the moment, just to notice that, well, yes, I do have some customers that buy a lot more than others, and I can sort that. You see how it's got the nice little gray bar chart, so you can see ascending and descending sorts. That's pretty useful, and it added another little transformation step. Let's see, we've also got something called state in here. And I know later on that the Census Bureau calls states states. There aren't any provinces in the United States, so I'm probably going to rename this field and just call it state and make my life easier later on. Now, I probably wouldn't do that when I was first doing it, but how many of you build it the way you expected to build it the first time? Usually you go through 5 different tries and then you realize in the end, oh, I should have read that. So I'm just going to rename this and call it state. And then I could also do, an actual geographic role here for states. Let's just define that as if I can keep my finger on here long enough to do it. Let's define it as a state. So now Tableau will treat that as a geographic feature. Anyway, I could do as many of these sorts of transformations as I wanted, but more or less I've achieved what I wanted to do with those 4 different files. I've got them grouped together. It's like they're smushed back together into a single table. Whether they were 1 million records or 100 million records, it might take a little longer on 100 million records, but it's going to treat them like they've been put into a single table. And when we get to the last step here and we can publish it as either as a hyperfile or a TDE or a CSV file. So if you don't have a database and you're pulling data from public or proprietary sources like many companies do now, you're subscribed to services, you're supplying critical data, you can pull that stuff off these websites and use this tool to put it together into some meaningful reporting. So that's the first flow, the union. Now, the next thing I'm going to do with the union is just do a cleaning step. Now, there isn't a word that says clean, but if you add step, it is by definition a cleaning step. And this is useful. Particularly when you're, just wanting to see a data set more fully and look at what's going on. Maybe there are other field types that need to be changed. Maybe there are other data types that you want to redefine. Maybe there's some kind of problem. You can filter, you can create calculations. You see this little gray text down there. It's giving you some information on the size of the total data set here, 25 fields, 9,000 rows. It just gives you a sense of what you're dealing with. So that's useful. Now, I'm not going to do anything with that just yet because I'm going to bring in another field. And this is regional manager. So in a separate table, there's the notion of a regional manager for reasons. And I want to basically do a join to bring that data into this union. So again, I'm not writing any script. I'm just going to go up here and say, you know what, I'd like to do a join. And actually, I don't want to do the join that way. Let me back off a step here. And back off a step here. And back off let me just back off this completely. I want to have my cake and eat it too here. I want to have my little union and my little join. And now I'm bringing in that data, and if I click on the join transformation, you see how down here in the lower left, it's showing me what it assumed that I wanted to do the join on. And region is what I wanted to do the join on. It selected an inner join type, and that is what I wanted to do. You can experiment with different join types and see the effects of that. But in this case, the inner join is going to work most likely because it's a pretty simple, use case where we have 4 different managers and not much of a chance of there being mismatches. And you can see down here at the bottom, it sort of gives you a review of the join result. We have 4 regional managers. We had the union get all of the rows, and the join result has all of the rows. So that's good. That's what I wanted. But once again, you can look at all of the outcomes here. Maybe table names, which is something that Tableau inserted into the data set, just so you knew the origin of that. Maybe you don't want to see that. It's not really useful. You could go up here and just say, I don't want to look at that field anymore. And once again, it tracks the changes. So because I made a change, you can always click on the Changes tab, and it keeps a record of every change you've made in that step, which is incredibly useful, especially, again, 3 months from now when you don't remember what you did. You can go back and look at what the transformations were within each field just by clicking on those little symbols. All right, so let's do a cleaning step now on the join result. And here we're bringing together all of that different information. And, that's pretty slick. Let me look at my notes and see what else I had. Okay, so in this part, I'm wanting to deal with a few problems. First off, let's see what state looks like here again. So we've got state, but that's probably okay. I think the first time I did this, I didn't recognize that state wasn't being recognized as a graphic entity, so I actually used the cleaning step to do that. But since I already did it in the join, I don't have to do it again. The other thing that I want to be able to do here, when you look at some of the data, for example, order dates, later on, I'm going to be using the order date to compare that to the year of a census done. So I really need the level of detail of this date to just be a year. So I'm probably going to do a calculation here to do that in the cleaning step. And so what I'll just do is go in this exact card and say, let's create a calculated field. And I'm going to call this a specific name. Let's call it order year. And you see it's already inserted the field. It's similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the Tableau formula editor. Let's make this a date part. And how many of you have learned that it's best not to type as little as possible when you're entering a formula, and probably the formula editor will put all the right symbiology in there for you. If I try to type formulas, I'm guaranteed to make 5 mistakes and have to go back and edit them. So I cheat and just let Tableau do the work. In this case, we want to make it a year, and then we want to close paren it, and that should work. It looks like it's a valid formula now. I can save it, and now I've got years down there, which is what I wanted. The other thing I don't need is the order date field anymore. I just don't even want to look at it. So I'm going to just say, go away. And then finally, maybe the order year for purposes, I'll leave that alone. You might run into a problem later, but it's good to have problems. Makes you learn things. So anyway, next step. Now Because the data that I'm going to bring in from the Census Bureau is much less detailed, I need to do something with my data to make it match the level of granularity of what I'm going to use for the Census Bureau. Because the end result of what I'm trying to do is do sales calculations on a per capita basis by state. The data I'm going to bring in from the Census Bureau is counts of population by state for 4 different years. So I'm going to do an aggregation grouping here to reduce the level of detail of my source data. So this is another kind of transformation. There's the aggregate step. And why am I not getting anything here? You should be seeing wait, that's why. Okay, so what do I want to group on? Well, you see the fields in the left side, and here's my recommendation. Don't think too hard. Just point at them and double click. Because you might overthink it and start trying to drag things into specific places. So if you know you're going to group on state in one case, and we do know that's going to be one of the groupings, just find state and double click it. And now it's inserted it in the group field pane. The next thing we're going to do is the year of the order. So somewhere up here I should have order year. I'm going to double click that one. Ooh, oh, I just thought of a problem here. Maybe I want to make it not a number, because what it's doing with numbers is trying to aggregate the numbers in a different way. So this is a case where a transformation before I do that step might be helpful. So for example, back here in the cleaning step, I skipped something that I was going to do before, because notice how the order year is being treated as a year. If I change that to a string and then go back here, let me start this over. I'm going to redo the aggregate function and state, again, I'm going to put that into view. And then I'm going to go back to the order date or order year. And you see the difference? Because it's a string, it's grouping it like a string or a dimension and not a number. So that's what's great about this tool. It behaves very similarly to the way Tableau Desktop behaves. And if you start understanding that, you realize, oh, I need to trick it to do the aggregation the way I want by making it a certain data type. You can later transform it into something else if you want, but to get this to work the way I wanted it to work, I had to figure that one out. And because it behaves a lot like Tableau, it pretty much worked the way I expected. So double clicking on sales is now getting the sales aggregates, and I can rearrange things here if that makes me feel better about how it looks down below. I can do that. And so I've got this aggregation done in which I've changed, the level of detail of the resulting output to that level of detail. State, year, sales as a total. That's what I wanted to get to in this particular step of the flow. And you'll notice that you're getting a running total up here, the number of fields and rows. I got 3 fields and 195 rows. So the combination of state, year, and sales is that many different states and years. So not every state has a sale. I can't do the math that quick. I'm sure somebody in the room can, but 50 plus states times 4 years would be a bigger number. So there's clearly not every state in this data set. All right, next, let's do another cleaning step here. So why do I want to clean it? Well, the order year, I think I want to change that back to something that's more like a year. And by doing this after the fact, I've gotten it back in a form that maybe will be more useful, maybe it won't, we'll find out. So that's the only thing I did there. Usually when I do these sorts of transformations, I always run either an output or a clean just to see if what I thought was going to happen. I'm not that smart. I sometimes need to confirm what I think is going to happen, and about a third of the time it's not what I thought would happen. So I think that's a good way to learn. If you sort of think ahead about what you're expecting, do it and then confirm to see if what you thought was going to happen happened, you'll find out what you don't know pretty quickly. So anyway, that's that stuff. Now, we've sort of forgotten about our other little guy down here, this other data set that I've been talking about, which was the census data from the Census Bureau. I just went to the internet and downloaded this particular set, and I've used it for other talks I've given in other contexts. I just love it because, like I said, it's broken in so many ways. You learn a lot of technique by using it, and it's really useful data to almost everyone. So let's go out and get the other data source here, and this is the highly descriptive field that text that the Census Bureau uses to tell you. It has population data by state. And now I've got this little field here that I can drag, and now I've got another input step. And while I'm at it, why don't I, change the colors of these, because they're all sort of related to each other. So I think I'm going to just right-click and pick a color scheme for my sales data. Since it's sales, I'm going to make it green like money. What do you want to make the Census Bureau color? Orange alert, red alert, black. I'm good with orange. All right. So, first step, let's put it in a cleaning step to see what's going on here. And here's the beginning of trouble, right? I can tell you what it looks like. It's got a bunch of merged columns at the top, so Tableau is confused about what column to assign that merged header to. There's a couple of layers in there. If you know Tableau Desktop, you can make that problem go away by just clicking on the data interpreter, and it ignores merged column headings. And if you've been using the data interpreter, you probably learned that trick 5 years ago. But the same applies here. You can fix those problems. Now, the other issue, and it's either a design feature or a problem, depending on your point of view. When you look at the geographies there, it's got a period in front of the state name, and that was probably by design, because also in the same field are things that are not states, like regions. So more likely than not, someone at the Census Bureau said, oh, we'll put a delimiter in front of the state name so we can separate them. But probably 98% of the people that are going to the Census Bureau don't know that that's why it's there. And they'll just be annoyed that it won't recognize it as a state, because Tableau doesn't know what period Alabama is. It only knows what Alabama is. So we're going to do a split function here that works exactly like it does in the data interpreter. Because they're a consistent delimiter here of a period, I'm just going to use an automatic split. And now I've separated out the actual states, and you see that I have this null. The null are the non-state things in that column. And I can point at that and right-click and exclude it, and I just got rid of my problem, which is really, really nice. And then the original thing, I can just say, I do not want to see that anymore. So let's just remove it. So you can see I already have 3 little transformations going on. I've filtered out something in the split. I cleaned up the geographic problem. I can also do things just like I do them in the data interpreter. I can give it a name. I could define a geographic type, just like in Tableau. But it's nice that it has it all in the little transformation steps, so you can go back and investigate what you were doing. Because these things can get really big and complicated, and you're going to forget what you did 25 steps ago. There's always a little visual cue that will let you go back and look at the work you did. Now, what's the other problem with this? We have a bunch of columns that are population either tallies or estimates. And I can tell you that the only columns that we really need in this data are these last 4 columns, which are the 4 years that correspond to the years that I'm going to be, joining them to. So, first things first, I just need to get rid of a whole bunch of columns I don't need by just removing them. And I could do that one at a time, or I could highlight multiples of them and do it. And this behaves very consistently with the way it would do this in the data interpreter. It's just a slightly different interface. So I could just keep going through this and removing the fields. Now, removing sounds permanent. It really isn't. It's removing it from your view. It's still there. It's just like the data interpreter. You're not changing the actual data. You're just fixing stuff about the data that you don't like. Now I've got the 4 columns of data. Well, that's a problem because Tableau is going to look at each of those columns like it's a completely different measure. It's not. It's the same measure for different years. So what I really want to do is pivot that so that I end up with 2 columns. One that would be the year and the other that would be population. And so I'm going to add a step to do that. And this is where we'll get into the pivot step. So this time I'm going to pick the pivot. And you see the controls down at the bottom are related to that. And so what I want to do here is select the columns that I want to pivot so that we have the row structure. And so what I'm going to do is just multi-select each one of the different columns and drag it over here. And so now those will be pivoted. And you can see that the result set looks closer to what I want, in that I have a column that's population, and those are numbers. I have another column that is state, and I'm going to drag that to the left here just because that's how I'm thinking about this. And then the other issue here is that this is where the year is defined, but it's stuck inside of a big long string. So I'm going to use another split function to get just those last 4 digits parsed out. And in this case, I'm going to use a custom split. So the mask that I'll apply is I'll use the fact that there's a closed paren and a space, and I'll just show Tableau a closed paren space, and I really just want to see the last 1 column, which would be the number at the end. And when I click that, now I've split out just what's in effect years, which I'm going to call year. And I'm going to leave that as a string because I already discovered that probably will work better later. The other thing I see here is that, maybe logically I'm thinking this way. This column, I don't even need this card anymore. That's just noise. And then this, I'm going to call it what it is. This is population. So now I can say I could have done that in the data interpreter in about 3 clicks, but it's only good for me for one time, and then every time I add more things to it, I have to spend a little time, massaging that. In this case, we're making a more robust structure that we presumably will be using for a long time, and so it takes a little more definition here because blending isn't at play. We're actually going to be defining joins. So it's a little more work, but at the end, it's probably worth it because I'm going to make this a little more robust. All right, next, let's see what we got out of that. I'm just going to put a cleaning step in because that's just my habit. And actually, let me do something I was describing earlier. Maybe I just want to see an output step of only that. So now what you're seeing is how it would output that in a text file or to Hyper or to TE. So I can see visually, very clearly, that is the structure I want its state, I want a year, and I want the population for that state. I could leave that out there, or I could just say, well, that's the result I expected, I'm going to leave it alone. I could just as easily have done that with the cleaning step. If I wanted to do some additional cleaning, I could. Either way works. The cleaning step gives you a little more, summarized metrics instead of just exposing every row and column in the data. So the other thing I haven't shown you yet that I probably should, let me scroll this up. You can rename these fields. Tableau assigns them names, but maybe you want to get more descriptive by putting in something that is telling you what it is. Population by state, and year. Enter. Actually, that's not what that's a comment. I actually wanted to go here and change that. The one below it is a comment. It kind of hangs out on the side. The other is attached to the description instead of clone. Either way might be useful for you. Now, the next thing we have to do is join these two together. That was the whole purpose of this. Get them both sort of shaped properly, get the math right, get the years to line up, get the level of details to be the same. Now all we need to do is create a join step, right? Well, let's see. I'm just going to try something because I'm not sure what will happen. Oh, I don't even have to define it. I just pick up something and put it on top of the other one, and it makes a join. Now I have to still define the join, but it's saying maybe an inner join will work here. And notice in the lower left-hand side, let me make a little more space so you can see. It's just used state only for the join, and that's not good enough. We really need to have the combination of state and year. So I'm going to add an additional join, order, year, and year. And ooh, it doesn't like that. Now why is that? Anybody got a guess?
The data types are different.
And the text and number thing. So one of them is a text and the other is a number, and it's not liking the fact that that's the case. I may have totally broken this somehow. So where is the text and where is the number? Okay, this one is a text. And what is this one? That's a calendar. So in this particular case, I don't really care whether or not it's an actual date, because I'm really just using the dates as a bucket for doing this join for calculation. Now, I suspect that by making that a consistent data type, when I come up here and drop this, it should like me better when I try to do that second join, the second part of the join, order, year. Yes, it's behaving much better now. It's showing you though that there's some mismatched fields on the population side. They did counts for Alaska, and I think there's, let's see, mismatched fields, Alaska and 1 year of Delaware. So there's a year that Delaware had no sales. But that's probably right in this data set. And I can use some of the other tools here to investigate that. I can see unmatched rows from the join. So it's giving you some statistics here, and probably this is correct. There is a mismatch, but it's a correct mismatch. I don't have sales, or I didn't bring in the sales for those geographies. So that's pretty good. That leaves one additional step here. Somehow I got way far ahead of my instructions. Amazed I remembered all that. So, as is my habit, I'm probably going to do a cleaning step just to see how everything looks and see if there's any fields that I don't really want to keep for my end purpose. State 1, do I really want that? I'll bet there's something else that's called state in here. And probably state 1 I don't need. So I'm going to get rid of that one. And this is just cleaning up extra columns that I don't really need to look at. So I'm going to remove it. State, order, year, and year. I kind of like order, year better, so I'm going to get rid of this year. Let's put this over here. I'm just going to remove one of these. And then I know state is important to me. And sales are important to me, and population is important to me, and I like all this. The numbers seem to make sense. I'm going to now make an output step. And so this is where you define exactly what kind of output you want. So I'm seeing the result set, and it looks good to me. I just need to clean up some of the appearance, which I'm going to do in Tableau in a couple of minutes. But you can see, you can save this to a file, or you can publish the data source. And the flow can also be published, and you can publish the flow and your data sources to Tableau Server. And then just like a lot of things in Tableau Server, you can schedule refreshes. So once you've built this thing, you can publish the thing to Tableau Server and then sort of set it on autopilot. As new data things come in, it's going to refresh to whatever schedule you set it to refresh to. So that's pretty useful. For the purposes of what we're doing here, I think I'm going to publish the data source just to show you that. Actually, I'm going to save it to a file, and let's put it on my desktop so it's easy to get to. And we'll call it Dan Flow Output. And let's make it just, now we'll leave it at Tableau Data Extract. We'll leave it that way. So now I've created that. If I run the flow, it's going to actually produce that Tableau Data Extract, and when it's done, it's done. So let's just see what that looks like. All right, I'm going to open up Tableau now. Okay, let's just pick up the data extract that I just made, and let's see what we got here. First off, I'm going to just filter for the latest year. I've got state that I'll put on a row. I've got sales by state. I've got populations by state. Let's get rid of District of Columbia because it'll mess up everything. Not really a state. I don't like thinking about it either. And let's create a calculation. Sales per 100K pop, one of my favorite calculations of all time. Sum of sales divided by sum population multiplied by 100,000 to express everything that way. And let's make the properties look the way we want them to look, like a currency. Now let's throw that out here. Put population down in the tooltip. Let's take a little reference line and drop it on both. Yeah, we'll do average. And now we can see what's happening. In fact, let's do one other thing. Let's put the sales per 100,000 on color. And edit that, make it more pronounced, the difference. Let's just test what that looks like. Yeah, let's reverse it, see if that looks better. I think it does. And so now you can sort of see pretty quickly either sorting by the sales per capita or sorting by the total gross sales by state, and this is where you can normalize for things. Superstore is anonymized Walmart data. So it's not surprising California has really large sales. But it's interesting that some of these smaller states have much higher per capita sales numbers. So 315, that's just about right on. Total dumb luck. Never done it before. So just to recap, let me go back and bring up my slide deck since I have one more slide to show. That was every kind of transformation step you can do in Tableau, and many different, I'm sure, infinite numbers of other smaller transformations you can make with calculations, renaming field types, changing the data type of a field, all in about 20 steps while I was talking. So that, I wasn't expecting anyone to remember. I will publish the data source, get it all to Paul with some very simple instructions, because if you learn to use the flow, you don't need any instructions. It's all documented right there. I'll send a packaged flow, the workbook, the end result workbook I built, and a few lines of text. I did want to mention that Rarely does InterWorks actually do a local on-site for free session, but I was told by my cohort, Stephanie, that Dan, don't forget to put up a slide that we're doing a free 1-day up to 90-minute session with anyone that signs up. We win. At the end of the story, the customer wins when there's competition. And I think really that's forcing Alteryx to more aggressively push forward. We have a lot of customers using Alteryx. They love it. It does things that Tableau Prep can't do. And is it free? No, but usually when you get something good, it costs something. So I think there's a place in the market for real expensive ETL tools for data people that know how to use them. They probably spent 6 months to a year really learning how to use them. Alteryx is like, the way I've always looked at Alteryx is I'm looking for the total spreadsheet geek that's smart as hell, that builds hugely complicated spreadsheets with macros and auto updates and pulling APIs into spreadsheets and web pages. That is the kind of person I think that's an Alteryx guy or girl, because they're going to devote a month or two of really playing with it to learn all the features, because I don't know, how many transformation steps does Alteryx have? Anybody? Hundreds? At least 200 to 300. It's much more full-featured. It does a lot of other things that Tableau Prep doesn't do. I think of Tableau Prep as automation of the data interpreter plus a few extra things. But I fully expect Tableau over the next year or two is going to keep adding to the feature set. Look what they've done already in the first 2 years, and that's just going to make the arms race with the Alteryx folks. They're still partners. Neither of them say they're competing. Currently, they really aren't. At some point in the future, I think they probably will be. But probably Alteryx is going to be a little better when Tableau comes out. Yeah.
Does Tableau Prep have any functionality for scheduling jobs at this point?
Yes, it does.
It's like including in
Here's what I needed to do that I didn't. Go to server, log in, and I tried to do that before this, and I had my access revoked from my own server or something. We probably have I'm on the latest version, and we probably haven't updated our server to the latest version. It's usually a few days behind. So you publish, and then when you're in there, you can see one of the options becomes a flow, not just a workbook or dashboard, etc. You see a flow, you click on that, and while you're in the flow, you can say, I would like to schedule this to refresh at whatever interval that you want.
But it's a function of server, right?
Yes, it's a server function at that point. They call it Tableau Conductor. That's a new feature that I think came out in the last 2 months.
Is the incremental cost to server, or is it included in your subscription?
No, not yet. Not yet. I think Tableau's real goal here is to give you a reason to want to get creator licenses and go to a subscription model, because they're basically giving it to you today. That's the unofficial position, and Cliff's probably not going to tell you the official position. He probably didn't know either. But I think that is what I've seen. They want to give people a reason to want to move that direction. And then at some point in the future, when it's totally awesome, it's probably going to increase the cost. That's what I've seen them do over the last 10 years. When they really make it, now it's great, absolutely recognized, okay, price. The server was an embarrassment 9 years ago. It was pretty inexpensive. Once it got awesome at about version 6.2, or started to get awesome, the price started going up. So they're trying to make sure they give you enough value to justify that cost differential. That was a really long answer to your question.
And so you started the conversation with a service call, call center. So I'm asking, does Tableau scheduler, can you do it by the hour, every hour for 24 hours?
Sure. I love call center data. What Paul didn't tell you is when he told me it was call center data, I'm like, what could be wrong? There's probably only 10 columns. He'll know what the codes mean. And that's what I was thinking. Oh, call center data is perfect. It's all machine generated. He'll know what the numbers mean. I just need to show him what to drag things. So when I see something like that, that was a fairly low risk. Paul built it up like I was a riverboat camp. But That was a pretty good gamble.
Yeah.
If it was somebody's CRM system, I would have been, oh, no, I don't want to touch that. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Even if you have the creator licenses, the conductor is still an add-on, right?
It's part of the server product. But, and I need to check this because I literally haven't looked. I assume when they released the latest release of Tableau Server, it just appeared. You just got it. Can anyone confirm that? Because that's what I expect. It just happened to be part of the release. There was nothing I received that said they're increasing the price due to Conductor. But at some point in the future, that could happen. But there was no price release on that.
Are there any performance tuning or performance monitoring tools
Of
that
this?
come with prep, like in Tableau Vista?
My guess is, of course. What I didn't show you because I didn't have time or I didn't want to attempt it, I was thinking of grabbing like 100 million records. The thing I didn't show you was sampling data. Because these are small records. If you're throwing, 100 million, a billion records on there, it's going to spin the donut for a while. And so they give you the ability to sample subsets to make it go quickly. In terms of performance, once it's created, well, when you published it as a hyper or a TDE file, it's going to be just behave exactly the way you've probably seen it behave in the past. And I don't want to claim that I've done enough of these with clients because the types of clients that we're doing this with tend to be smaller companies or analysts that are working with reasonably small data sets. I haven't worked with a company that's saying, hey, I want to throw these 5 billion records with a bunch of dimensions added. How fast will the flow work? Well, I don't know. I haven't done it. But there's always some price to pay for masking. And I just can't tell you what the pinch points are here. I haven't had enough work with it to know. So if you find out, send me an email.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.